and you'll be fine. By the time she met her husband, she'd been condensing conservative values into listicle form as a media influencer for some years, to the point where it seemed possible to realise this framework in real life too. So when marriage beckoned at 22, she tells me, "I thought I'd won the lottery." They were married within 4 months, arguably the equivalent for the right of my left-wing embrace of communes, anti-capitalist demos, and niche sexual subcultures. She was quickly pregnant. There were warning signs from early on. If I ever disagreed with him in any capacity, he'd just disappear for days at a time. I remember there were nights where he'd call me worthless and pathetic, then get in his car and leave. But she didn't see them thanks to the simplified anti-feminist ideology she'd absorbed and promoted. I had this delusional view of relationships that only women could be the one that make or break them and men can do no wrong. So she didn't spot the red flags even if they grew more extreme. He'd lock me out of the house. I remember having to knock on the neighbor's door on rainy nights because he'd get upset and drive off without unlocking the house. It was very strange to go from being this public figure on stage with people clapping to this girl crying, knocking on someone's door with no home to get into, and being abandoned with a baby. But as she tells it, the nightmare began in earnest when he was offered a work opportunity in Australia a few weeks after the birth of their baby. She did not want to leave her support networks behind, but he used the political and religious importance she placed on a lifelong marriage as a lever to force her to agree. Whenever I wouldn't do something, he would say, "I'm going to divorce you." So feeling she had no other option, she assented. He also insisted she should publicly quit work. His work required a high level of government security clearance when she was a right-wing activist who had faced deplatforming, state investigations and being banned from the UK. In their early giddy romance, this had felt manageable, but when we moved back to Australia, he really wanted to get back into his old work and Southern became a liability. So the pressure was on. It was like, "Lauren, you've got to hire lawyers, you've got to disavow everything, you've got to never talk publicly again." And in 2019, she announced that she was leaving media and activism altogether. I believed I had a certain role in my relationship, and it was to be the most submissive one that supports my husband's dreams. In a really, really warped way, this is what happens a lot with trad wife, like, relationships and stuff. Obviously, this has the irony of, you know, making a woman who had an extremely toxic role and job actually stop doing that job. But in like real life, in like normal relationships, it's obviously another tool of control in that you're going to rely on the husband for all the income, all the finances, and you have no independence. And also as you get older, you have no work history. So if one day he decides to like divorce you, while you might get some money, if you're a certain age, that's probably not going to last the rest of your life. So you're probably going to have to work again. And as we saw in my last video, that like 40-something-year-old ex-trad wife was saying, you know, "I work 7 days a week now. I had nothing on my CV. I was basically like a ghost, essentially. It was like I was a 16-year-old trying to get a job when I was 44. Here's the most important part, right? Like, this is the reality of being a trad wife. And this is also the reality that these conservative men want, and most conservative men want as well. And I've played this clip a million times to you, but because Lauren Southern has recently retweeted this guy, here is the Daily Wire crew, again, played it a million times because it's so telling, all bragging about how they don't do any household chores.
It's kind of a trick question because I hate them both equally, but I guess I would say I would rather do the dishes, but I'd prefer if she just did both of them.
Wrong answer.
Michael, to you.
Dishes, it's no question. I'm not sure in our entire marriage if I've ever done a full load of laundry, so I think I have that one.
I like it. All right, Drew?
Well, this is a trick question because I have not done anything around the house for 40 years. I've been a completely useless, but it's clear that if I had to choose, it would have to be dishes because she was just out of town for a month and I actually called her up and said, "How do you do laundry?" So I think dishes is the only thing I know how to do.
But they think that's funny and hilarious that none of them do anything, right? Of course, it has a more sinister undertone as well of why their wives are actually happy with this arrangement where they basically do nothing. So going on to the Lauren Southern part of this, thousands of miles away from friends and family, she reports becoming the closest thing to a modern-day Western slave. With no income of her own, she had to do everything: the lawns, the house, the cooking, the baby care, his university homework as well. And I didn't know anyone. I didn't have any support. There was no help changing diapers. There was no help Waking up in the night with a baby, I'd still have to get up to make breakfast before work. I'd be shaking and nervous for the fear I'm going to get yelled at. Then he'd berate her for spending all her time on tasks other than earning money. I was told daily that I was worthless, pathetic, dead weight. All you do is sit around and take care of the baby and do chores. When COVID shut down all real-world public life, her situation became hell on earth. Between the lockdown, claustrophobia, and her husband's behavior, she began to revise her initial willingness to leave public life. She hoped it would win back his love. He was so much kinder and sweeter when I was the boss babe traveling the world working. That's a funny word for it. It seemed like becoming a mother made him lose respect for me. It was shocking to me again because the traditional view preached the opposite, that men love you more when you stop working and become a wife and mother. In her experience, though, this was very much not the case. So a year after retiring to embrace the trad wife lifestyle, she posted her comeback vid and began making sporadic media appearances. But even though she was no longer a deadweight financially, her job failed to appease her husband. He kept demanding I contribute more financially, but then would chew me out whenever I would work. It didn't seem to matter what she did, he would just give me impossible tasks all day that I simply could not finish. It felt like he would almost send me on errands with the intent of having me fail. She told me, as long as I put on the high heels and the lipstick when my husband comes home, as long as I cook the best meal, as long as I'm always submissive and say, yes, sir, whatever you want, things will go fantastic. And if it's not fantastic, the listicle version of traditionalism would just say she should make more effort. It was, she says, an embarrassing wake-up call, finding myself consistently applying these rules and instructions I found on Twitter and then never getting the results they were supposed to get in the realm of a real relationship. Talking about the men this ideology attracts, when I spoke to other women in the wider network of ex-trad women, they said the extremely online nature of this gender ideology attracts a higher than usual proportion of individuals with existing psychological issues, other than saying those guys want someone they can feel they can have definite control, who's never going to leave them, who they can do anything to. So she goes on to say, her husband eventually divorced her because she had like 2 family members die, went back to Canada with their children, and he said if she did this, he'd separate and not have any custody as well. So that's basically how it ended. And she talks about this time as well. My brain was breaking between 2 worlds because I couldn't let go of the ideology. I had been banned from countries over this ideology. I had destroyed my reputation internationally for this. How am I going to let go of this? Then she goes on to say, post-divorce, after becoming a single mother, my mental health started to improve. I started to repair all these really important friendships, and I'm living a much happier, much healthier life than I was before. Some of the most miserable people I've met, in fact, absolutely the most miserable people I've met, have been stuck in this weird LARPy trad dynamic. The happiest people she knows, on the other hand, are just living in reality. So that story right there is a story you would have heard a million times. I can even think of about 3 people in my extended family who have a very, very similar story to that. Meet a guy, give up all aspirations of any career, give up working, have children with them, and basically when they have children, they start becoming incredibly abusive, and then you feel like you can't leave, and often it takes decades and decades to leave, and when you leave, you basically like have to completely start over with nothing. And a lot of people, especially older people, are conditioned to accept that, and that's why men get away with all this terrible behavior for years and years. And something that always rubs me the wrong way about why men like are leaning more conservative, they blame the left for not offering like alternatives and stuff, not blaming the men who actually want this old world to keep existing so they can just have no responsibilities for acting absolutely terrible and treating women like shit, which I think is a bigger part of the problem than no left-wing alternatives to like, I don't know, Andrew Tate or stuff like that. And of course, when you read that story, it's hard not to feel bad for any woman in that situation. And the way that article is written frames it like she finally came to the light, right? She finally realized that conservatism was trash. But she didn't. She realized that this trad wife lifestyle online that she helped promote is actually trash. And she's helping other right-wing influencers that were in a support group But if you go on her Twitter, you wouldn't really think that, to be honest. You'd think she's completely the same, because she hasn't woken up to the fact that conservative ideology is completely toxic and dangerous for women, even if you pretend like you can be some sort of conservative feminist or something like that. You can't. And Lauren Southern's still existing in this conservative ecosystem and boosting all these conservative media figures and working in conservative media ensures that this type of ideology will keep existing, and she is still promoting it, whether or not she's actually writing on her Twitter, you should be a trad wife and be subservient to a man. She's still boosting the community that actually promote this stuff. And Matt Walsh is a good example of this, like a mainstream conservative YouTuber for the Daily Wire. She's retweeting him. He says the exact same shit about this as well. Exact same stuff. He is really no different to her ex-husband in this way, and he has a similar marriage set up where he has like a bunch of kids and talks about never doing chores and stuff like that while he works his cushy YouTube job, which probably doesn't involve much hard work at all, considering every YouTube channel at the Daily Wire has a massive crew on it. So that's where my sympathy ends from someone who had a massive crew on the far right, who continues to do this and will have sympathetic articles written like this where we're meant to think she's better than this ideology suddenly, when she's not. She's still promoting it, which means more women will suffer because people like her are still promoting this lifestyle. And although it might have been rebranded as something great like the trad wife lifestyle, it's basically the same stuff everyone of a certain generation would have had stories of friends or family going through, with mainly abusive husbands doing this stuff, where women had no autonomy, where women had no career prospects, and women were expected to basically be a servant, and there wasn't much you could do if your husband was very, very abusive. And that's why left-wing feminist activism was a good thing that shouldn't be demonized, because where would you be without it? Because these people still shit all over the left, like the leftists of the past, being responsible for so many of us having better rights among a variety of things. So when we think of like token conservatives, we largely think of people who are from like minority groups who might be conservative talking heads because they've clearly been paid to, right? So like Candace Owens for like a black female conservative, Dave Rubin for a gay conservative, Blair White for a trans conservative, right? And we don't really think of women as like a token group in this. And of course we can't ignore white women's role in propping up American conservatism, American racism and stuff like that. I've actually spoke about this in a whole video in terms of white women's role in slavery. At the same time, this is still an ideology that victimizes women and ensures women will still be oppressed. So there really is no room for a conservative women who want some sort of liberation of women, because you're trying to have your cake and eat it too. You're trying to take this one issue off the liberals and off the left and take it for yourself because it personally affects you, trying to make it compatible. And there was even gay people in fascist Germany who pointed at the example of the ancient Spartans and Thebans to say that they could be compatible with fascism. And of course, this didn't work because they were just deluding themselves. The same way that Lauren Southern and other female conservative influencers are deluding themselves that conservative men will ever accept this, will ever accept this ideology, because their ultimate goal is the trad wife. They want that for every single woman now because they think it's the right way to run society. But anyway, that's it for the video. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.
Like, honestly, so for those who don't remember, Lauren Southern was on the Great Replacement tip with Stephen Molyneux way back in the day. Like, I want to say it was around 2016. Like, Lauren Southern is an old head in the kind of alt-right, borderline white nationalist space. Does promoting marriage and motherhood inevitably make women easy targets for subordinate status, increased vulnerability, and a return to second-class status? One of the very first columns I wrote at Unheard back in 2019 described how, for me, becoming a mom meant giving up on a great deal of the liberal ideology I embraced when younger because it was impossible to square with the embodied reality of caring for a baby. A relatively conventional home life turned out to be much more fulfilling than the radical one I'd adopted with my progressive politics. Here we have, this is a big thing that conservatives like to harp on, and this kind of vaguely anti-feminist space that they like to occupy, where they will talk about how modern, like, feminist ideology has made women not want to be moms or not want to work at home and not be housewives. Almost nobody is actually saying that. Like, it is one of these things they've made up almost entirely whole cloth. Now, I'm not saying that there hasn't been, because I'm sure they would point to some Harvard professor or somebody who gave a TEDx talk one time about how, oh, feminism is harmful for this, and they're going to take those words out of context to be like, see, look, this is what the entire liberal establishment thinks. But by and large, most people don't actually think or approach their issues or the world that way. I know plenty of people who have started families and stuff. Like, that's not for me. I haven't done it. Oh, hello, we have a guest. We have a special guest star, everybody. Say hello, guest star. You smell like cat food. Gross. Hello. Hello, baby. I love you. Yeah. You want to speak into the mic? Do you have things to say? Share your wisdom? No. I love you. Okay. Like, it's just not... It is not a tangible reality that this is something that women are being forced into. If you want to... Hello, cat. Hello. She's bumping head bumps. You want bumps? Is that what you want? If that's how you want to spend your life, you want to raise a kid and be a stay-at-home mom and a family, I fully think you should be able to fucking do that, and nobody should try and stop you. But trying to do it, like, if that is what you truly want, that is completely fine. I do not care. But trying to live your life like that, and not only live your life like that, but bring other people's lives into it when there are other people, like a child, getting involved as a kind of political statement, I think is incredibly fucked up. Why are you giving me bumps like this? Hello, little baby. And that whining isn't the cat. The whining is the dog. Hello. Oh, hello. You're so cute. You're so fluffy. Cat, what the hell are you doing? You're being such a little weird booger. What is your damage? Huh? She's so purry right now. Give purr. Turn to Mike. Goodness gracious, Kate. So let's get back to, now after we've done with this brief cat interlude, my accounts of questioning this individualistic ideology and embracing marriage and motherhood have resonated with social conservatives. Most of these, it goes without saying, feel, as I do, that family life and women's distinctive sex realities should be better understood and valued in the public conversation, which is like here's the thing, is when you get down to so many of these arguments, is that essentially that is not a unfeminist perspective. Now, putting sex realities, that is kind of a warning phrase, and putting that at the forefront of what a woman's identity is and has to be in society, that's not great. That's not great, but by and large, like, realizing the distinctive issues that women have to go through and the differences between those issues and other people isn't a bad thing. And that is a progressive lens, even if they don't view it that way. And they view it through a skewed version of that lens, but we'll talk about that in a second. Some, though, take more hardline positions that women should never work, for example, that we should always be submissive, or even that women's right to vote should be repealed. This is what we see from just pearly things and from a lot of the stuff that we've watched for hate churches, because like a sect of radical modern evangelicals will be like, okay, women only need to stay in the home, they shouldn't work jobs, that's evil and worldly. Women were given certain like rules that they need to live by, and that is why we're seeing those kind of things come back. But surely any stance which risks lending momentum to such extreme arguments cannot be in women's interest, you'd think? I explored this question recently with Canadian right-wing firebrand Lauren Southern, whose early video content regularly challenged liberal feminist orthodoxy and promoted domesticity. Our stories are symmetrical in some respects. Both of us embraced radical politics in our early 20s, me on the left and Southern on the right. Both of us embraced the ideologies that felt inspiring in the free-floating world of the internet, and both of us, albeit in different ways, have course-corrected back toward reality in part via the fiercely practical experience of caring for a child. Southern's story might easily serve as a cautionary tale for how social conservative talking points can lead women into danger. For where I lost my 20s to commune life and niche sexualities, she left media at 22 to embrace a socially conservative template for women. The lifestyle often idealized by social media influencers as trad wife. Except it wasn't all 50s pinafores and cute cupcakes, it was a living hell. And I'm sorry I'm smiling as I do this, but as I'm reading this, because it's not funny that like her life was upended over this shit. But like I don't know what you like. This is the leopards eating people's faces party. Like, people warned you, people stood against you for years because they said that the people you like and the people you agree with are hurting women. They are doing bad things to women. And then you willfully ignore that. And not only ignore that, but you perpetuate that ideology, you spread it to others, you encourage others to take part in it, only for you to find out that, oh shit, you were wrong the whole time. It's really hard to not like feel a little bit smug about it. Nor has she learned that she was the only conservative woman in this position. Comparing our experiences, though, two things emerge. Firstly, that this is not simply a matter of the right being uniquely toxic for women, though, as Southern's story reveals, there's plenty of scope for toxicity. It's rather that purist ideologies, as such, map at best uneasily onto the practical realities of life as a woman, and especially as a mother. And secondly, that the simplifying, polarizing incentives baked into the contemporary internet are increasingly warping the ideologies of both left and right into such extreme forms that any sincere effort to apply these in real life will almost inevitably be the stuff of nightmares. I feel like there is much more of an effort to push on the right wing this kind of trad movement than there is for, I guess she's kind of, the writer of the article is kind of positioning like hippie commune, multi-gender, like that style of living as the thing the left is pushing. But like, I see people actively advocating for trad wives and saying that that's the way women, I know people who want to do that kind of commune life, but I've never seen it online. So I don't know if that's like really a fair comparison. Southern was perhaps the most telegenic figure in the brash, young, and very online alt-right movement, which emerged in the 2010s, quickly gaining international notoriety for her views on mass immigration, Islam, radically motivated farm murders in South Africa, and the racially motivated farm murders in South Africa, and the supposed harms of liberal feminism. Content that saw her accused by the radical left-wing Southern Poverty Law Center. Again, I don't like how you're calling the Southern Poverty Law Center radical left-wing, of racist dog whistling, and even hovering at the precipice of outright white nationalism. Yeah, well, she was. Southern herself has always denied this, but hasn't stopped her critics on the left accusing her of far-right agitation. Abruptly, she disappeared in 2019 to embrace marriage and motherhood in her husband's home country of Australia. She was, it seemed, all set to embrace the nurturing feminine domestic role promoted by right-wing traditionalists, idealized by trad-wife influencers, and criticized by progressives as dangerous and stupid. I mean, like, again, I think this is a little bit of a blanket statement. Like, if you want to live at home and take care of a kid, and like you live in a way that your husband can totally provide for your needs, and that's what you want to do, you want to be a homemaker, who fucking cares? Like, honestly, who gives a shit? progressives who would kind of deride this and call it dangerous and stupid, there's good reasons, and I'm willing to bet we're going to find out some of them in here. 4 years later, though, Southern has caused a new round of shockwaves, this time with a video recounting what happened next, the breakdown of her abusive marriage, her return to Canada as a single mother, and a stint living hand-to-mouth in a cabin in the woods. Jesus Christ. And, well, because here's the thing, and you kind of saw this with Steven Crowder and his messy divorce, is when you have this culture that basically demands subservience from women, a lot of women don't understand, or at least in these spaces, they don't understand that that means that the men want them to essentially live as slaves. They want them to clean up after them, to take care of everything in the house, to have no real personality, to give them sex when asked for. Like, they view them as entitlements, not as people, not as partners. And that is a crushing reality for a lot of people to come down to, especially after already marrying and learning this about somebody. It's another one of the things that you don't want to, like, it's another problem that arises from a lot of, like, modern Christian impurity culture, where you might, man, this is something that has been forever, is that you might be sexually incompatible with somebody. And if you are in a monogamous relationship and trying to live by that, that could be a real problem. That's how you have marriages where somebody goes and cheats. That's how you have marriages where people stay, like, in the closet as gay or trans or whatever for 20, 30 years. Because they lock themselves into these tiny little boxes because it's like, okay, well, I'm married now. This is what I have to do. Southern has attracted vitriolic criticism from the right for speaking openly about how trad life went wrong for her. See, again, like, because honey, they never saw you as a person. Like, they saw you as a figurehead, as an ideal, but never as a person, never as somebody with actual feelings. She, however, sees speaking out not as a betrayal of her own side, but as continuous with her earlier willingness to challenge progressive consensus on topics such as immigration. Quote, I'm not worried about saying the things I'm saying right now that are getting me so attacked online because I've dealt with this with South Africa. I've dealt with this with mass immigration. I've dealt with this with my critiques of feminism, and every single one turned out, oh, maybe she was onto something. Honey, that... You don't see how this is the opposite of your criticism of feminism. Like, okay. 4, she tells me she's not alone. She tells me she knows many other women still suffering in unhappy trad life marriages. Well, one of her WhatsApp groups, she says, is like the Underground Railroad for women in the conservative movement. Jesus Christ. Some of these are prominent media figures. There are a lot of influencers who are not in good relationships, who are still portraying happy marriage publicly and bashing people for not being married while being in horrendous relationships. She hopes that in speaking out, she can reassure all these women who are thinking in their heads, I'm uniquely terrible and I'm uniquely making a mistake, that no, something is generally more amiss. What then is amiss? In her view, it's not that conservatism as such is fundamentally mistaken or that complementary sex roles are unworkable, but the online trad life ideology has distilled a version of these roles that's both rigid and wildly oversimplified and thus woefully ill-equipped for real life in ways that pose significant risks for women in such marriages. How then did Southern get from posting videos titled Why I Am Not a Feminist to defending women's sex-specific interests within family life? This is, after all, not a million miles from what used to be called feminism. It's a long and bitter story in which Southern did her best to live a purist internet ideology to the letter, only to receive a grim object lesson in its shortcomings. By the time she met her husband, she'd been condensing conservative values into listicle form as a media influencer for some years, which just goes back to, like, never trust people who write listicles. To the point where it seemed possible to realize this framework in real life, too. So when marriage beckoned at 22, she tells me, Riley, I thought I'd won the lottery. They were married within 4 months. Good God, honey. 4 months is fucking, that's too, that's not enough time to know somebody. Like, especially, that's another thing, like, you don't really know somebody unless you've lived with them. Because, like, somebody's habit, like getting to know somebody through living with them is an entirely separate deal. That's rough. Oof. They were married within 4 months, arguably the equivalent for the right of my left-wing embrace of communes, anti-capitalist demos, and niche sexual subcultures. She was quickly pregnant. I don't think that's the same at all. Like, that's not, that really isn't the same. That is not the same. Like, going to a commune is an extreme edge case where, like, people on the left get married and get pregnant at a young age. Like, that is such a weird... She keeps harping on this similarity between them, but that's not the same at all. There were warning signs from early on. Quote, if I ever disagreed with him in any capacity, he'd just disappear for days at a time. I remember there were nights where he'd call me worthless and pathetic, then get in his car and leave. Jesus, what an asshole. But she didn't see them thanks to the simplified anti-feminist ideology she'd absorbed and promoted. I had this delusional view of relationships that only women could be the ones to make or break them and men can do no wrong. See, this is the other side of also when you hear conservatives talk about how, like, progressives want to denigrate masculinity and make it seem like everybody is against traditional masculinity and toxic masculinity isn't a real thing. It's like, no, this is the kind of shit that toxic masculinity is meant to address. And when you aren't addressing this, you're letting it flourish. You're letting it fester and actually, like, tangibly harm people. She didn't spot the red flags even as they grew more extreme. He'd lock me out of the house. I remember having to knock on the neighbor's door on rainy nights because he'd get upset and drive off without unlocking the house. It was very strange to go from being this public figure on stage with people clapping to the girl crying, knocking on someone's door with no home to get into, being abandoned with a baby. What the fuck? Even, like, and I'm, if this dude did all this shit, I'm almost positive, like, he was probably physically abusive as well. Even by asshole standards, this dude seems like an all-timer already. He also insisted she should publicly quit work. His work required a high level of government security clearance. She was a right-wing provocateur who would face deplatforming state investigations and was even banned from entering the UK. In their early giddy romance, this had felt manageable, but when we moved back to Australia, he really wanted to get back into his old work, and Southern was a hardcore liability, so the pressure was on. It was like, Lauren, you gotta hire lawyers, you've gotta disavow everything, you've gotta never talk publicly again. Again, the kind of thing you'd think would be a talking point before you get that far in a relationship. But I guess not.
Enemy attack helo above.
Oh, 2019, she left. That tracks. That's one of the reasons why nobody's heard about Lauren Southern for, like, years at this point. Then, thousands of miles from friends and family, she reports becoming the closest thing to a modern-day Western slave. With no income of her own, she had to do everything. The lawns, the house, cooking, baby care, his university homework. And I didn't know anyone. I didn't have any support. There was no help changing diapers. There was no help waking up in the night with the baby. I'd still have to get up to make breakfast before work. I'd be shaking and nervous for fear I'm going to get yelled at. Fuck, man. As horrible as a person as she is, I am glad she's speaking out about this, because this is... like, when you hear Nick Fuentes or John Doyle or any of these little incel basement-dwelling dweebs talk about what they want in a woman, what they want in a mate, this is the ideal for them. Like, I need people to understand, this isn't an edge case. As obviously, if she's in a network with other women who are talking about it, this is what they want. Like, the trad wife aesthetic has become kind of this cutesified, like there was that Mormon influencer a while ago who's doing, like, cooking videos where she's in cute little 1950s dresses. And again, that version of it, totally fine, whatever. If you want to just dress up in cute little frocks and you have a husband who loves and supports you, because I'm sure that not every situation is like this. Like, statistically, it just can't be. There has to be women out there with their cute little trad dresses who stay at home raising two little cherubic children, and the man of the house goes and works all day and brings home the bacon, and they all sit around a table. I am sure somewhere out there is some family living that dream right now. And if everybody is happy, I wish the best for them. Like, vaya con Dios, whatever. But this is the reality of pushing that kind of lifestyle as a political ideology, rather than a mutual agreement between partners that is how you both want to live your lives. that you both understand and respect your wants and needs, that you're both able to work symbiotically to meet those needs. Because that's how marriage works. It is a partnership. What this kind of man wants is not a partnership. It's a bang maid. Yeah, Lexi Darling, some trad wives are more like cosplayers grifting for incel clicks. Yeah, it's become this weird, like, pocket internet ecosystem of, like, it is kind of like porn, almost, in a way. Like, you saw it with the Classically Abby stuff, where, like, everybody knows Ben Shapiro's sister, Classically Abby, did some, like, God, what was the title of her series called? Like, classic living or something like that, where it was just basically all about being a classical woman. And she got a lot of clicks. Like, I think it's very weird how people have fetishized her just because she has, like, she has sizable assets. Like, I don't know how we're gonna say it. Like, she is naturally very endowed. Like, she just is. Like, she has big boobs. But I know for a fact that she knows that, and she used that to help further her kind of platform. And, like, hey, whatever. Again, if that's what you want to do, if you want to use those assets to your advantage, God be with you. But I'm tired of people acting like that is any different from porn. Because when in reality, it is. It is a fantasy of a woman that appeals primarily to cis hetero men. Like, oh my gosh, I can get a wife like that. Like a wife that cooks and cleans and looks like that, come on. Like, and people might be like, oh, well, it's not the same because they're, like, she's not naked and she's not devaluing herself. If you are advertising yourself like that in this kind of trad wife space, and this is gonna sound like I'm saying, oh, well, she's asking for it. I'm not saying that at all. But you have to know that people are going to view you as an ideal of what that could look like. And that's what I'm saying. And, like, the thing with Abby Shapiro is, like, Abby Shapiro is like she's pretty in a very basic way, but the way people on the left, I've also seen people being very disgusting about her, is just fucking gross. Yeah, Lexi Darling, I'm okay with it as a kink thing, but you have to break the kink kayfabe sometimes, or else people will take it as reality. Yeah, well, and that's the thing, is that they don't want to. They want to push it as like an ideal, which is a problem. But, like, again, if that's the life you want to live, whatever. You know, it's like there's an entire kink out there based around, and they do it for porn too, based around free, quote unquote, free use. And this ties very into those kind of, like, housewife stuff. And free use is basically like a genre of porn where somebody will just be, like, cleaning dishes or whatever, and somebody can come up and just fuck them, or they'll be, like, folding laundry or whatever, and then they'll just keep doing that thing, with the fantasy being that you can just, as generally speaking, that you as a man can just use somebody, like, literally just use their body to get off and then go about your day. And that ties so closely into so many of these narratives about trad wife and trad living. Now, the people who make those videos, the people who engage in that kind of play as kink, whatever, fine. It's consensual, who cares? That's honestly, on the list of kinks, that is not even really that weird. Like, who cares? If you enjoy that, I think that is maybe one of the most harmless kinks in the world. The problem is that I think so many men genuinely expect that kind of treatment. When they are brought up hearing, like the shit we hear in the hate church all the time, about how women need to be subservient to men, how they need to fulfill sexual desires. We've talked about how PragerU in the past has been like, oh, even if, or Dennis Prager in the past has been like, even if a woman isn't in the mood for sex, she should still try and put out, because the man, the man wants it. And it's like, when men grow up hearing that kind of shit, they feel entitled to it. And this is the kind of asshole that entitlement breeds. When you spend a man's entire life saying, oh, there's nothing wrong with being toxically masculine, you are entitled to a woman's body, a wife should do everything for you. Like, this is the kind of emotionally stunted man-child that ruins their own homes, that ruins the life of their children, and the women that they supposedly love enough to marry. I was told daily that I was worthless, pathetic, dead weight. All you do is sit around and take care of the baby and do chores. When COVID shut down all real-world public life, her situation became hell on earth. It was, she said, the only time in my life where I idealized dying. God damn. Instead, between the lockdown claustrophobia and her husband's behavior, she began to revise her initial willingness to leave public life. In part, she told me she hoped it would win back his love. He was so much kinder, sweeter, and more pursuant of me, and I was his boss babe. It seemed like becoming a mother made him lose respect for me. Men love you more when you stop working and become a wife and mother. In her experience, though, this was very much not the case. Never mind the pop anti-feminist ideal of breadwinning husband and homemaking wife that Southern had once promoted. The freedoms for women to work and have interests outside the home turned out to be a lifeline. Those already inclined to dislike Southern's politics might feel a certain vindictive satisfaction at this collision of ideology with reality, but arguably, in having taken so long to see the potential downsides of her own anti-feminism, Southern simply shared the same blind spots as much of the mainstream left and right. It is surely true that conservative advocacy for complementary sex roles sometimes ignores questions about women's physical vulnerability and the scope this affords for domestic abuse. Yeah. Conversely, today, many self-identified liberal feminists have also forgotten that the earliest women's movement was grounded in the sex-specific material vulnerabilities Southern experienced firsthand. The magazine Pop Feminism I internalized in 90s Britain seemed less concerned with such gritty realities than more nebulous goods such as empowerment, representation, and smashing stereotypes. Which, those aren't bad things either. Like, it was, like, it became more fixated on that because the other stuff was already, like, kind of fought and won. By the time Southern made her first viral video denouncing feminism, this was still more pronounced and joined by the even more disembodied ideology of gender identity. Oh, great, so this is probably a TERF. When the physical vulnerability inherent in becoming a mother gets downplayed across the political spectrum for different reasons, perhaps it's no wonder why Southern only gradually came to grasp the practical value of some first-wave feminist victories. Like, it doesn't, though. Like, okay, so this is a... I'm assuming it's a TERF. She hasn't said anything like too crazy gender critical yet, but like the idea that the physical, I'm assuming by the way this is worded, she's saying that gender identity is causing the physical vulnerability of becoming a mother getting downplayed, which just isn't true. Like what? Like this is a perfect example of when people say like, oh, you know, oppression isn't pie. Like it's not like because somebody else gets a piece, you don't get any. That's not how it works. Like, do you think because people care about gender diverse people that they don't care about mothers now? What is, I don't, Even though she was no longer a dead weight financially, her job failed to appease her husband. He kept demanding I contribute more financially, but then would chew me out whenever I would work. It didn't seem to matter what she did. He would just give me impossible tasks all day, tasks that I simply could not finish. It felt like he would almost send me on errands with the intent of having me fail. All of this, Southern tells me, was difficult to square with her religious beliefs. She would pray by his bed when he was angry with her. Fuck. Hoping that if she gave him grace one more time, he'd realize the depth of her love and be kinder. God damn. That is, like, this is... When people talk about religion as being just brainwashing, that's exactly what people are talking about. She thought she told me that as long as I put on the high heels and lipstick when my husband comes home, as long as I cook the best meal, as long as I'm always submissive and say, yes, sir, whenever you want, things will go fantastic. And if it's not fantastic, the listicle version of traditionalism would just say she should make more effort. Fuck. It was, she says, an embarrassing wake-up call, finding myself consistently applying these rules and instructions I found on Twitter and then never getting the results they were supposed to get in the realm of relationships. It seems to me, I tell her, that condensing millennia of religious belief and real-world domestic praxis into viral memes has produced a right-wing gender ideology every bit as oversimplified, dematerialized, and radically disconnected from the complexities of life as the disembodied left-wing version. Again, that's just like not like. Do you think that gender, quote unquote, gender ideology is like? I'm sorry, this is gonna get me on an entirely different fucking tangent. That's just not true at all. That's just wild. In turn, both Southern and other women I spoke to within her wider underground railroad of ex-trad women think that, perhaps like its left-wing analog, the extremely online nature of this gender ideology attracts a higher than usual proportion of individuals with existing psychological issues. Man, like, they really can't just focus on how awful this right-wing shit is without being like, actually, then there's also people on the left who are like, they have to like cram it into fitting in their narrative too, because it doesn't directly align. Ellen, not her real name, is another previously married erstwhile trad who is now in Southern's network. She describes how the men who self-select into these communities are often wayward, antisocial, disagreeable, and very, very misogynistic. Fucking shocker. Who could have guessed? Who would have predicted this? From years and years of people like Nick Fuentes leading the incel movement. Frequently themselves from broken homes and with limited real-world social support, and when their relationships go wrong, as they often do, the very online trad gender ideology has no remedy. If there's a problem due to the fact that he's crazy, violent, or hateful, Ellen says, that's just how it's supposed to be. There's nothing really done to fix it. Southern is careful to emphasize that she knows many traditionalists and happy, loving, complementary marriages, but she says it's a fallen world, and her community includes many women whose husbands seem to have been drawn to listicle-style gender ideology precisely because of the power it offers over women. You think. Those guys want someone they feel they can definitely control, who's never going to leave them, who they can do anything to. In the end, it wasn't Southern who broke the spell, but her husband. Around the time her son was toddling, 2 family deaths prompted her to arrange a visit home to Canada. Her husband threatened to divorce her if she went, and Southern tells me she had to sign an affidavit promising to return. Finally, he relented, only to text after she landed in Canada declaring that because she'd chosen to travel, the marriage was over. She moved in with her parents, then into the kind of affordable accommodation available to those on the breadline. In Canada's brutally expensive housing market, a cheap cabin surrounded by woodland and trailers. Even then, she still hoped her marriage could be saved. I still wanted to make it work. Girl, God, like, that's just brainwashing at that point. How? This is what happens when you don't have, like, a gay friend to talk to. This is what happens when you don't have, like, anybody to be like, girl, you need to take a baseball bat to his tires. Nail baseball bat to his tires. I was texting my husband and calling him, begging to get back together, but he said, no, I don't want even shared custody. What a piece of shit. The cabin, she said, had an ant infestation. Everyone used her washing machine because it was the only one, but she says it was unexpectedly healing and filled with a genuine sense of community. Still, it was a confusing time for her. My brain was breaking between 2 worlds because I couldn't let go of the ideology. I was at a similar age when I fell away from the radical left, and the sense of disorientation she describes as familiar. God, stop trying to bring your own thing into it. It's not the same. Where I was free to grapple in private with my cognitive dissonance, Southern had built an international profile promoting this worldview. I had been banned from countries over this ideology, she says. I destroyed my reputation internationally for this. How am I going to let go of this? Like, I constantly wonder this kind of thing of, like, what if, like, this would never happen. Like, for a lot of these people, this would never happen. They have too much of a vested interest in maintaining their beliefs and their base. But, like, one day, just for shits and giggles, what if Nick Fuentes woke up and was like, you know what? I think I'm a communist. How do you go about, in this attention economy, how do you go about making that shift? Or like, even would you? Probably not. Like, and Nick Fuentes would never, by the way. He's too pathetic and filled with hate. His inferiority complex wouldn't let him admit he was wrong. But like Foxbat, yeah, like it would take years and years of effort, but especially for people who are in a more public spotlight. Every manosphere talking point had turned out not to match her experience. It wasn't true that only women mess up relationships. Being submissive didn't fix everything. Yes, women mostly initiate divorce, but as she discovered, this can happen because a man wishes to avoid incurring child support liabilities. When she described her red pill conditioned expectations of divorce to her lawyer, the woman laughed at how mistaken she was. More than anything, though, what shattered the listicle mindset was simply realizing how much nicer life could be when you live the life that's in front of you rather than trying to follow rigid precepts. Despite not being the right-wing ideal of aristocracy and everyone going to mass, she realized she was infinitely happier there in that woodland among her working-class neighbors than she ever had been in her marriage. Quote, every single thing I was experiencing in my real realm, non-online realm, was the complete opposite of what I was being told. Yeah, you fucking think? In Southern's view, the increasingly visible gulf between right-wing gender ideology and living in reality has an analog in the memes and talking points of the broader E-right, a phenomenon that, once again, is mirrored on the other side of the aisle. But it's not, dude! Like, unless she's gonna try and say that, like, trans people are living in this fake reality and they're all miserable, which is like, dog, come on, you're not gonna say that trans people are as miserable as people like this. I'm assuming she's gonna try and say that. Here, viral and overly simplistic takes, simplistic ideas replicate with seemingly very little reference to reality, human nature, or the world as it actually is. For example, she describes the Repeal the 19th meme, which calls for ending women's right to vote, as the right-wing version of defund the police. That is not fucking true at all. Again.
Enemy throwing Semtex.
Okay, one of those is taking away women's rights. Another is asking for police reform. Like defund the police doesn't mean you put every police person out of a job. It means you don't fucking militarize a police department. Like those are not equivalent at all. Southern thinks the internet's baked-in incentives encourage this drift towards more caricatured viral politics. For example, she tells me that where earlier generations of red pill content really focused on exploiting women sexually, it has become just teaching men to hate women. That, again, like always has been. Simply because it's a simpler, cheaper, and more viral message and therefore easier to sell. Someone less online than Southern might reply, yes, but surely the era was disappearing into online ideological rabbit holes in the first place and confusing memes for life principles. This is true, but so much of social life now happens online, including for children, that Southern is far from the only individual to have reached adulthood with a set of templates for life gleaned more from memes than real-world adult guidance. Nor is this a problem for just one side of the political aisle. Why do you keep saying that? Against an online world with entropic culture dissolving effects at this scale, what hope is there for any of us? A pessimist might say this future looks bleak for interpersonal relationships, indeed for a public life, code court. But I think Southern's story offers cause for optimism. It suggests that maybe, just maybe, our current crop of internet-generated political derangements will turn out to be a temporary symptom driven by generations who grew up without the internet and hence without much psychological defense against its many pathologies. With the wider world in flux, it's hardly surprising to find ourselves here again. The challenge is finding solutions that are grounded in reality rather than abstract purist ideologies. But the internet's first generation of natives may be the ones who bring us back down to earth. Even the erstwhile queen bee of the extremely online right is now convert to living in reality. So perhaps there's hope for the rest of us, and our politics will find a way back there in the end. God, that fucking sucks, dude. That was a bummer.
Threat neutralized.
Exactly a big deal, but I'm being indicted? I'm not being indicted, but there's a chance that a lot of YouTubers and content, anyways, we'll get to that in a second. We'll get to that. Dan Schneider is suing his haters in epic style. And that's not good for me because I am a Dan Schneider hater. There's a reason that this creepy motherfucker has so many videos made about him. It's very weird. And there's also a reason his name is Dan Show Me Your Feet Schneider. Dan Schneider is a name that you've definitely seen recently over the last couple months. If you've been taking a chance and paying some attention to the negativity that's been coming out of the world a lot and stuff, his name really has some buzz. And you can see if you go on Google Trends, Dan Schneider. There we go. If we go to this here, you get him and seeing how he's become relevant, and you go here, March 23rd. Oh, interesting. That's a lot of Googles. This is the day that an episode of the show called Quiet on Set was aired, and it really kind of took Dan Schneider's name and kind of made it bad because a lot of people are saying a lot of really bad things.
Working for Dan was like being in an abusive relationship.
Dan's treatment of people on his shows was an open secret.
He's a brilliant mind that's behind some of the greatest children's television of all time. I mean, All That, iCarly, Drake and Josh, Victorious, The Amanda Show, Zoe 101, Sam and Cat, Keenan and Keel. The dude is an entertainment powerhouse. At least that's how he'd like to be remembered. But unfortunately, the show, Quiet on Set, painted him in a drastically different picture.
My lawyer filed complaints, gender discrimination, hostile work environment, harassment. And it was so devastating.
How safe can any kids be in that environment? There would be even bigger problems down the line with actual on set.
And YouTubers have been painting him in a drastically different picture, myself included, by the way, for a long period of time. Starting with Dan seemingly treating kids like adults, it would progress and graduate into something more obscene. I also remember seeing that Robert Downey Jr. is like a whistleblower or something, and he's got this like fake alias, some alias on a forum, and he's like a man behind the curtain blowing the whistle on wood or something. That was back in 2017, so doesn't seem like that's the case. Iron Man has fallen off. If the stories about him are true, why hasn't anyone exposed him publicly or at least privately? Why is he still allowed to work with children? Surely he's a liability to Nickelodeon if the allegations are true. See, that's sort of where I lie on it, right? Like, it definitely looks creepy, and it's definitely really weird, and he's certainly a bizarre guy, and he is just like not likable and all that stuff, but innocent until proven guilty by a court of law, right? Dan Schneider is allegedly a P that turned out a lot of those Nickelodeon stars, including Amanda Bynes. There was a celebrity most think is Robert Downey Jr. who outed him on CDan blog a few years ago. I cannot believe that I actually remembered that shit. That's so funny. Anti-Dan Schneider sentiment has reached a fever pitch over the last month and a half, I'd say, even though it's been, he's been sus for about a decade, over a decade now. Look at this guy. And then this guy said, yes, 12 years later. Dan's legacy has wholly shifted from being a legacy of endless creativity, a legend amongst children's television, to a legacy of hostility, sexism, and alleged abuse. Allegedly, until proven in court. For real though, it's not funny. The show Quiet on Set, I'm an idiot, by the way. It's a very dark show. We're a month and a half removed from it now, and it's just disturbing. It's incredibly disturbing. No one's really that surprised by it, I'm sure, but it definitely put into the zeitgeist negative information of Dan, and now that's kind of the common sentiment amongst Dan viewers, is that he is a creep, weirdo, and allegedly. Quiet on Set has been a massive deal, and there's been an equally massive response and sort of backlash, I guess, since the docuseries came out and showed everyone all these disgusting and vile behaviors, some of the stuff that's been going on behind the scenes at Nickelodeon shows, including a show that DS was involved in. He was the showrunner, okay? A brief recap of what the docuseries covered and why now Dan Schneider is suing Quiet on Set for defamation. Okay, it's very important. He would play favorites in the cast, and if you were someone that he preferred, you could do no wrong. But if you weren't a favorite, you were expendable, essentially. There's even footage of cast members talking about how they were out once Amanda Bynes came on. They're no longer favorites from Dan Schneider.
When Amanda joined the show, the new favorite had arrived. I was out.
out. He had infamous freakouts where he would stomp on the ground and roll around in circles like a pill bug.
Dan was like a tornado. He'd come in and like, you'd be like, wow, okay, what just happened? Dan showed up.
One former star, Raquel, talks about a time in which the crew brought her out a birthday cake and he had a freak outenheimer on that, guys. Very strange. This is a Watch Mojo video.
Why'd you get her that cake? Like, that's a big cake. Like, she didn't need that big of a cake. And I was just like,
Miss Ballou was not invited back after this, and there was no explanation. We believe it was because of the birthday cake. And then you compare that to when he brought a cake out on the set for iCarly when Miranda Cosgrove had her 18th birthday, and it gets real odd and strange, and this is what a lot of people make their thumbnails of. God, it is so creepy.
I mean, honest to God, I could go on and on about all the wonderful qualities about Miranda, but I know time permits, and I will consolidate it to just this one thing.
That is really weird. That's very strange. I've got to say, that's weird. If I was an adult man, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't have said that. Top comment, Creepy Dan back at it again, 5 years ago. It's a long time it's been happening. He also allegedly, I don't know why this is really alleged necessarily, but he behaved in ways that were misogynistic to female writers on set. He would degrade them, he would yell at them, he would degrade them, he would make them feel less than. There were also 2 writers that shared one salary, and Dan said that was a normal thing that happened a lot.
I remember speaking to the line producer, and she said that I was going to have to split a salary with a writer that I did not know.
so they were getting 2 for the price of 1. They were going to hire 2 women and have them share a salary. And I never saw it happen to any of the men.
So yeah, real bad look for Dan. Real bad. And it just kind of propagated the whole rumors to another fucking level. Like, I'm talking another level. To the point where if you're going around asking people for their opinion, you know, giving out a poll as to whether or not DS is a P word, it's gonna be a solid 95% sure. For sure, absolutely. And then maybe 5%, I don't know who that is. And then he responded, and it was such a bad, terrible response.
Dan, how are you?
I'm okay. I really appreciate you reaching out and giving me the opportunity to talk to you about what we saw over the last 2 nights.
He responded and was interviewed by a former cast member who launched some incredibly softball questions at him, and it was just really bad, and it was picked apart massively by everyone again. Not good. Comments got turned off. Poor guy.
Let's talk about the massages.
Okay.
Watching the content yesterday, that was disturbing.
It was wrong. It was wrong that I ever put anybody in that position. It was the wrong thing to do. I'd never do it today. I'm embarrassed that I did it then. I apologize to anybody that I ever put in that situation. And even additionally, I apologize to the people who were walking around Video Village or wherever they happened, because there were lots of people there who witnessed it who also may have felt uncomfortable. So I owe them an apology as well.
But he's now suing them for defamation. So that's where we're going to get into it. And it's a bit of the weeds. I'm going to be honest, guys. It's a bit of the fucking weeds. And I feel like I should probably get a lawyer. To be honest, I feel like I should have a lawyer. Just kidding, I have a lawyer. As you can probably imagine, the response was very poorly received. 17,000 likes, 213,000 dislikes, and comments obviously turned off. He got ratioed massively. And now he's filed a defamation lawsuit against Quiet on Set producers. And his main claim is that the docuseries falsely portrayed him as a sexual abuser. Now, if he would have led with this, I feel like it would have been a bit of a different story in terms of the public perception of Dan Schneider, because this is definitely a more sort of cut and dry response to being called something you're not, if you're not that thing, is to sue those people for defamation. And to be fair, though, the lawsuit doesn't really mean a lot either, obviously. A lot of information will be subpoenaed, I assume, and we'll figure everything out, and people are gonna have to back up their claims. So that's gonna be good. We'll be able to actually find out what happened, hopefully, as a result of this. It's weird that he didn't just lead with this, though. Maybe he feels jaded by his own favorite former stars condemning his response and unfollowing him on Instagram. A lot of people unfollowed him and Nickelodeon on Instagram. Maybe he's just having one of his infamous freakouts, and this time his lawyer was on board and they are suing the producers of Quiet on Set. I'm not sure, but a lot of people did not accept his original apology, and maybe this is just what he feels like is the only result, the only thing he can resort to at this point. This fella, Jack Salvatore Jr., did not accept his apology. He was a cast member on iCarly.
My name is Jack. I was a child actor on Zoe 101, one of this guy's shows. I also worked in his production department as an intern on iCarly, and I worked in the writer's room on Salmon Cat and Victorious. This Max documentary that was recently released did a really good job of uncovering the details of workplace toxicity, specifically on Dan Schneider's shows for Nickelodeon. We can talk about the massages. We can talk about the fact that he would literally count his gold coin collection in front of his crew who was living paycheck to paycheck. We can talk about how sometimes he would bring out his shotgun to scare one of the writers when they were working at his house. We can talk about the high-level conversations I wasn't supposed to hear about how Nickelodeon didn't want to recommend antidepressants for Jeanette McCurdy after her mom died for fear that she might kill herself and make the network look bad. But what I do want to talk about is never letting this stuff happen again. This is an entire industry built on hope and dreams and adrenaline and wish fulfillment. And that can be a very dangerous thing for megalomaniacs to wield. Even in posting this, I'm a little afraid. Is this going to screw up my career moving forward? I have no idea, but I think it's important and it needs to be said. Because of my silence ensures the perpetuation of environments I don't want to work in anymore, then what is the point of working in them? And until Homeboy goes on 60 Minutes to answer some questions from some real journalists and not a cast member of his who he's paying to be there, apology not accepted.
And now I'm not going to just reiterate what this guy says, but you can listen to this. He drops a lot more information on it than I feel comfortable with saying. Because gold coin collections? He used to bring out a shotgun? Now on to the lawsuit, and by God, Dan is coming out fucking swinging. I love reading lawsuits. He's got Mosner Legal on the job. Okay, guys, Sullivan and Worcester LLP. The lawsuit lists multiple entities, including Warner Brothers, Sony Pictures, Maxine Productions, Mary Robertson, Emma Schwartz, and also 50 unnamed does. 50 unnamed does. 50 other fucking people. And that's important to us content creators because it kind of looks like it might be some YouTubers on there, or content creators, or people online with aliases. So Maxine Productions is the main production team that put out Quiet on Set, and Mary Robertson and Emma Schwartz were the founders of that. So it's really levied towards them, Sony Pictures, and Warner Brothers. The show. They're suing the show. And both Emma and Mary are part of Sony Pictures nonfiction group, and they haven't really done much aside from Quiet on Set. They did Dr. Death, Cutthroat Con Man, which sounds fucking stupid. And they also did a show called June. So I don't really know what the fuck's going on. The beginning of the lawsuit contains a little bit of what every single great lawsuit contains, and that's a bit of a glazing for the defendant. The plaintiff, the defendant, the plaintiff. The plaintiff. I got my law degree from YouTube University, all right, during that whole Johnny Depp thing. Fuck, that shit was crazy. Schneider, a well-known television producer, creator, and a writer responsible for some of history's most beloved children's television shows. That's true. I will say that is true. That's high praise. That's some Nick Cage high praise, but also accurate. I mean, those are some good shows. The lawsuit then goes on to claim that the portrayal of Dan on Quiet on Set was just a hit job. It destroyed his reputation and his legacy through the use of false statements, implications, all that Dan was a sexual abuser, and something that he claims he is not. Hence the gigantic lawsuit. The lawsuit also says they did all this for clickbait, ratings, views, and money. That's what he's saying. That's the base of the lawsuit against the entertainment companies, television companies, those two ladies, and the yet to be named 50 does as well. Part of me thinks that these 50 does are YouTubers, TikTokers, creators, content creators, whatever, whoever covered the story and weren't careful with their words and weren't like, allegedly, or who weren't talking about the story specifically. There are a lot of people, I saw a lot of people just being like, yes, Dan Schneider is a P word. I'd like to think that I'm not guilty of that, but this is definitely a game that I'm playing, and I'm trying to get better and better and better and better at it. But by God, that would be funny if my name showed up in this lawsuit. That would be some good content. Another even larger, thicker part of me believes that these are YouTubers because they go by fictitious names that are just placeholder till the legal team has ascertained the legal names of these characters.
1 through 50, inclusive, and therefore sued by the defense by such fictitious names. Plaintiff will amend this complaint to allege the true names and capacity. The time is then certain.
I mean, you could probably go to 500. Not even just 50. You can sue probably 1 million YouTubers and TikTokers especially, dude. I saw some insane shit on TikTok. Now, the first piece of evidence that is cited by the lawsuit comes from a YouTube video, so this could perhaps even be further evidence that YouTubers are fucking cooked in here. You know, maybe not. I assume not. It would be really interesting, though, to see a bunch of YouTubers get sued for something like this. My assumption, by the way, is that the truth would come out and we would all know the exact reality of the situation. So it's kind of a, I wouldn't say a good thing, but it's going to be an interesting thing to say the least. The trailer for Quiet on Set heavily implies that Dan Schneider is a P word. Pretty negative trailer, so I get why it's cited as evidence for this defamation claim.
In the early 90s, Nickelodeon was kid everything. And you better hope that your house had cable.
Wasn't there to educate you. We were there to have fun, to get slimed, to be entertained.
And this is when Dan Schneider arrives, Nickelodeon's golden boy. He created these shows that were hugely successful for them.
No one had ever really done sketch comedy starring kids for kids.
He launched the careers of child actors who became major stars.
For 20 years, he shaped children's entertainment and culture.
Thank you for being here.
But that marked one of the darkest chapters.
Specifically, the first 38 seconds of that video are highlighted there's a YouTube, it's a link that's really funny. They believe that these words imply that there is an involvement of Dan committing crimes with the people who are in this show, a true crime event, because it's like a true crime thing, but it's not. So far, it's the only criminal is the convicted who were on the show. So I get it. I see what they're saying. True crime event, Dan Schneider. They're saying he's an abuser of kinds. Not good. So this is when it gets kind of wild. Okay, little Charlie Kelly, Always Sunny type, you know, really reaching here. Trailer cuts to footage of a female writer talking about how Dan's treatment of people on the show was an open secret.
Dan's treatment of people on his shows was an open secret.
And they relate the usage of the phrase open secret to a 2014 documentary film titled An Open Secret, which is a film that exposes abuse in the film industry specifically and implies terrible, horrible things to Dan. I'm not sure if that's what they meant. I think the phrase open secret is pretty commonly used, especially when people are kind of pieces of shit and everyone doesn't like them and it's an open secret and there's an elephant in the room and a broken clock is right twice a day still. Dan's team also takes great offense at the question that's asked in the trailer, how safe can any kids be in that environment? Followed by being even more upset with the following statement, there would be even bigger problems down the line with actual pedophiles on set, implying that he is...
There would be even bigger problems down the line with actual pedophiles on set.
So yeah, makes sense. The lawsuit sort of plays it out. I can see how you definitely would watch that and be like, well, this guy seems like a piece of shit. But also, you just look at any video on YouTube about Dan Schneider from the last 12 years, and you could also see that as well. There's a lot of people who feel this way. It isn't a new thing from this website, from this film. I said website. It is this Quiet on Set. It's crazy and it's fucked up. And we learned about Drake and all this stuff. All that sort of came out, or rather was an open secret. They're definitely cherry picking. Makes sense, but they're also absolutely cherry picking it because they claim that 70 seconds of the trailer he's the sole focus, but a lot of it is about these fucking three guys. They say actual P words and then it goes to these fuckers. So it's, to me, it clarifies it that he's not, he's like, you know, there was some abuse, etc. But that's a broad term right there. These guys are the actual freak fuck. It also, in my opinion, validates the question, how can any kids be safe in that environment when you do actually have 3 P words present on set? How can any kid be safe in that environment? Dan's a showrunner and there's 3 P words. Dude, what the Dan and the 3 P words. That's not a safe environment. That's a dangerous environment. And if I was a parent, I feel like I'd get really angry and act like an ape. And instead of coating myself with onion as a natural insecticide, I would coat myself with the blood of my enemies. Definitely creepy. I see what they're saying in the lawsuit, but at the same time, I feel like the trailer is very compelling and also relatively clear in that Dan is creepy as for sure, but there's bigger problems. And those problems luckily have kind of legally been dealt with, but they still persist. It's pointing out bigger issues is the whole point of it, right? That's the whole point of it, I think. That's what I took away with it. The lawsuit also goes on to call out probably the most rational and valid point in regard to the trailer, which is that the actual P words, only one of them is named, and it isn't even their full name. There's no context given. Over 2 minutes in, they say Peck. Peck was coaching the victim. That is Brian Peck, the guy who abused Drake Bell.
11 charges of child sexual abuse related to a child actor.
His image isn't shown, whatever. So basically, they're just talking about Dan Schneider, who is a bigger name, and then they're also talking about actual P words, and he believes that everything is being conflated there, which, to me, that's the most rational point, I would say. I would say that definitely makes a little bit of sense, but it's definitely sensationalized, and with a functioning brain, you can certainly discern that it is exactly that. It is sensationalized, and Dan Schneider is a big name. He's a big name when it comes to being creepy as in Nickelodeon and fostering environments of weirdness and potential abuse. He's a showrunner on shows. He's the guy. He's the fucking guy. You know, he's got to be able to take responsibility for these kind of things if they come out, especially if there are actual pedos kind of under you. If you're fostering an environment that's not exactly conducive to the safety of children, as alleged by Quiet on Set, I feel like it's a valid trailer in my opinion. I mean, I don't fucking know. Shit, bud. 51 on that list, Jane Doe. I'm 51. Fuck. So those are the complaints that are levied at the trailer. There are also complaints for the individual episodes as well. The lawsuit alleges that in episode 2, they imply that, like Jason and Brian, 2 convicted actual felons, Schneider was also a bad guy like them, okay? And they do this by comparing a line that's used to describe Jason Handy, an actual convicted F word, with a similar line used to describe Dan in episode 1. So yeah, I don't know how much of a reach that is, but oh well. Finally, they go on to allege that in episode 5, the show Quiet on Set insinuates heavily that DS is a P word because they show his face when talking about actual convicted felons. There's a part when they're discussing updating laws that anyone who's ever been convicted of harming a child should never be able to work in Hollywood on a Hollywood set again, which I agree with that. Why the fuck not? Sure, why not? Yeah. Sure, or just anywhere. Then they follow up that idea, that hypothesis, by describing the loopholes that allowed Jason Handy and Brian Peck, 2 convicted abusers, all right, to slip through. They follow up on the loopholes, and they show Dan's face instead of Jason or Brian's faces. So yeah, common to editor L. Kind of coming all together, it makes sense. The lawsuit claims that the defendants acted with malice, with a purposeful disregard for truth, and they even refused interviews with witnesses that didn't fit their narrative. So yeah, it's coming together, right? He's built his lawsuit. I'm really excited to see how it goes, to be honest. And I don't know how I feel about that claim. I don't see any sort of evidence provided, which it doesn't have to, I suppose, until the actual lawsuit goes through, but we'll see what happens here. I do know that in the show, they gave Dan the chance to refute claims. I mean, there's a bunch of little tiny pieces that say, Dan Schneider claims he never once considered gender while hiring. Dan Schneider denies Ginny's claims and states that he had no control over salaries. Dan Schneider denies he was pushed out of the writer's room and claims he needed to focus his energy on another show he was creating at the time. And then he also acknowledged it all in his apology. So I don't know what the fuck's going on. It's very confusing now. I remember earlier, by the way, I said people with a functioning brain might be able to see the trailer and see that it isn't just a direct insinuation that Dan Schneider is a P word. But really, that's the whole point of the lawsuit, is that it is possible for the average person to misconstrue information, even if it's provided succinctly and clearly and all right there before you. People tweeted shit like this: arrest Dan Schneider. Dan Schneider behind bars. Dan, get in the van, Schneider. I hope that Dan goes down like R. Kelly and Harvey after their docuseries. I watched. Dan Schneider, Brian Peck, and Jason Handy need to be in prison. So yeah, one of them is not convicted, right? Dan is seeking from the defendant in his prayer for relief compensatory damages in various forms because his career is destroyed, punitive damages, attorney fees to be covered, Quiet on Set to be taken down or edited to remove all that's been covered in the lawsuit, which is pretty huge. On top of just the show, which you could argue that is fair and concise and is a net positive, there are a lot of YouTube videos that just pretty much say that Dan is a P word.
Nobody talks about it.
Best of luck,
It's
soldier.
the big secret.
The folks back home are counting on you.
And it's widespread?
Oh, yeah. I was surrounded by them when I was 14 years old. Surrounded.
literally didn't even know it. It wasn't until I was old enough to realize what they were and what they wanted and what they were about and the types of people that were surrounding me till I went, oh my God, they were everywhere like vultures.
I mean, genuinely, like there's a lot of content out there that spawned from Quiet on Set that uses imagery, clips of interviews as proof that he is someone who should be in jail for crimes that a lot of people would consider to be the worst type of crimes, I would say. For sure, what's clear is that it wasn't that great of an environment, judging by the response of a lot of people who worked on the shows with this guy as showrunner. He didn't exactly facilitate the best environment for them, which that's common, I feel like. That definitely happens. And he also created an environment that allowed for predatory behavior to transpire. I don't know how much control a showrunner has, but I'd like to imagine that it's a lot. And, you know, some responsibility should be taken there. And it did seem like he took some responsibility in his little apology video thing. But at the same time, it's all just weeds, man. It's hard to tell exactly what the he thinks, because this is like the antithesis of that apology, in my opinion, the defamation lawsuit. On top of that, we can definitely say that he ain't beating the creep allegations. He's a creepy motherfucker. He loves feet. iCarly, a lot of shots at children's feet. Victorious, a lot of shots at children's feet. He requested feet pics. He'd tweet feet pics. Guy loves feet, and that is inarguably a F word. Okay, guys? That is inarguably an F word. Tweets like this. Charlie tickles Sam's very unusual toes. If you have a moment, will you please name Sam's toes for us? I'm sorry, what? I'm sorry, what are you talking about? And really to tie it off though, since Quiet on Set came out, the systemic nature of these problems has kind of come out and been put to a head, which I think was the point of the doc anyways. A lot of people are talking about shit. Former Nickelodeon cast members, not shows produced by Dan specifically, but yeah.
One of the horrifying things that happened in my experience with Nickelodeon was when Nickelodeon sent computers over to production when we were starting filming the show, and when they were turned on, there was child.
She goes on to say that Nick sent computers over, and when they turned on the computers, there was CP on them when they were turned on, which is absolutely insane. Another cast member for the Naked Brothers band, which was one of my favorite shows when I was a little guy. I used to imagine being in the band. Anyways, she posted a TikTok talking about how she had to kiss a 30-year-old man when she was 14 or 15 years old and was traumatized. I just can't even imagine this shit, dude.
I kissed this greasy ass, dusty ass dwarf. I'm sorry to this man, but I did not want to kiss him. Also, guys, I'm 4'11". He's a 30-year-old man. I'm sorry, I couldn't even watch it. It gave me fucking the ick. I couldn't. And it honestly gives me PTSD. I'm watching this Quiet on Set documentary, and it's talking about how integral and vital it is to create, especially when it's like a kids cast, to create an environment where kids feel comfortable to say no, or I don't feel comfortable with this. And then I'm like, yeah, maybe they do express that though. It's also more important to create an environment that listens to the kids and actually does not make them do things when they don't want to do that. Because they made me kiss this 30-plus-year-old man when I was like, what, 14, 15?
It's important to note there are monsters everywhere. Very clearly there are monsters in Hollywood. There are monsters in children's television shows. And Dan certainly is not the worst of all of them. Absolutely not. I'm excited to see how the lawsuit plays out. Definitely did some weird shit when he was there. Absolutely. You cannot argue against that. And he is deserving of criticism in regard to all of those things, in my opinion. Yeah, ultimately, I think Quiet on Set did good. I don't know. What do you guys think? I'm excited to see how the defamation thing fucking plays out here.
Hostile spy plane established overhead.
Yeah, I don't know what happened, but it's a shocking display. And as a fair and balanced reporter of facts, I will hand it to Pierce. This is an unimaginable W.
Incoming stun grenade.
Let's do the Israeli spokesman that got absolutely comstered by Piers Morgan. This same guy. Netanyahu, under pressure from all sides, interviewed the Israeli government spokesperson, Avi Hyman. Here is a 5-minute fest where Piers Morgan actually genuinely becomes a journalist for a brief moment. Let's watch.
Do you believe you've killed?
We don't have exact figures, as you know, it's the fog of war.
But you've got exact numbers for Hamas terrorists you've killed. Why wouldn't you know how many civilians you've killed?
Because obviously our focus is to go after the Hamas terrorists, and
hang on, I mean, that does imply that you're putting a bigger premium on killing Hamas terrorists in terms of numbers and accountability than you are in a...
Yes, Piers through Hyman in this, honestly.
Some civilians, that can't be right, surely. If you know exactly how many Hamas terrorists you've killed, you must know how many civilians you've killed. Otherwise, you're prioritizing the lives of terrorists over innocent people.
Piers, with respect, don't put words into my mouth, please. I didn't say exactly 14,000. I said around 14,000. Whereas Hamas will come out with precise numbers that statisticians will look at.
Give me a ballpark number for civilians.
Well, you can use the ballpark as far as the Hamas figures, which I reject as being false.
Well, if they're false, why would you give me those?
I gave you the numbers that I had.
No, you told me you know how many Hamas terrorists you've killed, but you don't have any idea how many civilians you've killed. I'm just bemused. Why wouldn't you keep count of both?
I saw a TikTok about this, and they were all saying you turned Piers Morgan into a believer. Yeah, I don't know what happened, but it's a shocking display. And as a fair and balanced reporter of facts, I will hand it to Piers. This is an unimaginable W.
I don't have that information
unexpected
to give you, Piers. If I did, I would.
You literally no idea how many civilians you've been killing.
I can tell you definitively that our aim is to go after Hamas.
I'm sorry to push you on this. That's quite extraordinary. You're an official spokesman for the Israeli government, and you have no idea how many civilians you've killed. I thought you just told me that you were particularly careful about...
I can tell you what those numbers are. Those numbers are just the number of military-aged men. That's it. Every Palestinian that has been killed that is over the age of, I believe by Israel's designation, they consider anyone over the age of 17 or 16, if I'm not mistaken, to be military-aged men. Not 18 plus. No, it's 16 plus, I think. They consider every single person that has been killed over the age of 18 that is male to be a Hamas militant. The cutoff is from 16 to I think like 65 or something. That's what that number is.
Not killing civilians, but if you don't know how many you've killed, how can you say that with any certainty?
Because even if you were to go by a ratio of the Hamas figures, we would still be far ahead of any Western army.
That wasn't my question. You know it wasn't my question.
I don't have the information.
You literally have no idea how many civilians you've killed.
It's not that I don't know. I'm not authorized to give the information. I don't have the information.
That's complete nonsense. Why are you authorized to give me the number of terrorists you've killed and not the number of civilians? I don't understand.
Per Google AI, the Israeli Defense Forces IDF considers any male over 15 years old in Gaza to be a Hamas fighter. Oh, over the age of 15, I guess. This part is incredible. Look.
You literally have no idea how many civilians you've killed.
It's not that I don't know. I'm not authorized to give the information. I don't have the information.
That's complete nonsense. Why are you authorized to give me the number of terrorists you've killed but not the number of civilians? I don't understand.
This pause is incredible.
Can you explain?
Piers, we will go after Hamas. We will ensure that we...
You want me to believe you're being incredibly careful about how many civilians you're killing, and you have an amazing exemplary record, but you don't know how many civilians you're killing. So how do I know you've been careful?
Piers, when the dust settles, we will come out with the proper numbers. Hamas runs to the press daily.
Yeah, when we are done with our genocide, okay? When we are done with our genocide, then we'll let you know. Chill out, okay? When we are done with our genocide, we'll let you know exactly how many civilians we killed in that genocide. Calm down now.
When the dust settles, a lot of people will have died, and you know how many Hamas you've killed, but you don't know how many civilians you've killed. And I'm just asking you why. Why is it you've kept a record of one, but not the other?
I personally don't have that information to give to you. You can ask me over and over. I'm not going to come up with more information. I don't personally
You don't know?
I don't have that information for you.
Well, you're an official government spokesman for the Israeli government, and you have no idea.
Piers, I came on here to focus on what's going on with the war.
Well, actually, you came on here to answer my questions, I think.
Yeah, and I don't have an answer for you for that.
And I didn't intend to press you on this point because I assumed that you would not respond the way you have. But I've never had an Israeli spokesman who simply said, I have no idea. Particularly after you boasted about the fact that you've been very smart in the way you've avoided killing civilians. How do you know if you've got no idea how many you've killed?
Because I know the way in which the IDF operates. I know the way in which we go after the terrorists in the best possible way. It's not what I've said, it's what General Petraeus has said. It's what John Spencer from West Point has said. It's what multiple British generals have said. Israel goes out of its way to avoid civilian casualties. That's what we'll do. If you can point to me to another conflict by which they have evacuated, got out of harm's way civilians to the extent that Israel has done, then fine.
With respect, Mr. Hyman, how can you possibly expect me to accept any comparisons to any other conflict or war, given that you do not know how many civilians you've killed?
Piers, you understand that I can't prosecute the war over the media.
I'm just asking you for basic information. I'm not trying to trap you, and I'm not trying to unfairly harangue you. I think people are watching this and they'll make their own conclusions. I just find it astonishing that the moment I ask you how many Hamas you've killed, you can tell me immediately, and the moment I ask you about civilians, you haven't got a clue, literally. You're not even prepared to issue a ballpark number. And I think people will find that staggering, particularly given that you are insistent that you're doing everything you can to avoid killing civilians. To which, again, I just simply ask, how do you know? If you don't know how many you're killing, how can you possibly be sure that you are, A, doing better than other people waging war elsewhere, or B, that you have any idea how many you're killing? You don't, clearly.
I feel bad for all the jobs. The work of the Israeli mouthpiece, the mouthpiece for the Israeli government and its ongoing genocide is a difficult one. That's why they keep cycling them out. Jonathan Konkunkrius is gone, even though he's like now doing it for the fun of it. Elon Levy was gone. Now they're cycling out that fat British guy, the friend of the Zionist Friends to Israel of the Labour Party guy. Seems like this is the new British dude. This is the new British demon. Obviously, for the record, do I think that Pierce is genuine? Of course not. And I'm sure that tomorrow he will do some more unhinged shit, as always. But he will also always feature people like Abby Martin. Here is Abby Martin going toe-to-toe with the son of Hamas. This guy who she calls an Israeli spy, an Israeli asset that I don't know enough about, went toe-to-toe with my queen, Abby Martin. Abby Martin is a phenomenal investigative reporter and an incredibly important voice that has been for a very long time alongside her, I believe, husband or boyfriend, not entirely sure, her partner, Mike Prisner, has been advocating against American imperialism. Mike Prisner, for those of you who don't know, was also on the show as well.